Um, well, I was born during the liberation movement, and the movement had already been, um, implemented and going strong when I was born, because the armed struggle for liberation of Eritrea, or as is also commonly termed as Eritrea fighting for its independence from Ethiopia, started in 1960. I was born in 73, so that's 13 years into it. So, sometimes I jokingly say I was born in a war zone,
Okay.
but that's really, not a joke, because Eritrean liberation movement was, it was a movement of the people. So that means every Eritrean was involved. Um, and you could say was a freedom fighter or was a soldier, or as we were known from, in Amharic, from Haile Selassie's time, Wambedewoch, which means bandits, right?
So what would you say would be the earliest origins of the country known as Eritrea? What are the earliest origins? When was, I mean, even I say not necessarily by name, but even just in territory and
so the earliest name that I'm familiar with, or I feel versed in, is Bahari Nagasi, which Bahari, the word Bahari means sea, and Nagasi is king, right? So kings of the
Kings
sea.
of the Sea. Oh,
So
wow.
and if you think about where Eritrea is situated, it's right on the coast of the Red Sea. And so the word Bahari Nagasi refers to, not just, kings, meaning, they have a kingdom, but they are the defenders, and if you see Eritrea and in relation to the rest of Africa, it really is part of that top, part of that crown, and you can't keep your crown without having your kings ready to defend that kingdom and that crown. So to go back to, I started saying as children, so we were taught of history, and it was orally transmuted. So every day, as soon as you were born, you grew up, listening to history, being told by elders, and not just your family's history, but your nation's history and the history of Africa. So the elders would tell us, and they would do it in forms of song. So one of the first songs that I learned, as far as the national history, was this one song about how the invasions of like the Ottoman Empire, and so we're talking now about just Eritrea as a nation, and so it doesn't include the ancient history of that land, but just to give us children that sense of identity, because Eritrean identity had to be formed in the midst, or against all odds, and in the midst of brutality and bombardment, constant bombardment. So they would say salam. Salam means peace. The word salam means peace. So they would say salam, salam, tshate biherat. So tshate, the word tshate means 9, and we have 9 ethnic groups. These are recognized, ethnic groups. We have, people that are of those ethnic groups that speak Tigrinya, and they may be, also Bilan or Tigray, but the recognized ethnic groups are 9.
Okay, real quick, how old has those 9 been in that region? I'll say, or how far does this go back? I'm curious.
Probably to the Ottoman Empire. So the invasion of the Ottoman Empire, because that did come to North Africa, that did come to Eritrea. First to Egypt and then down to Eritrea. And
So the
Ethiopia.
Ottoman Empire, they were one of the people who came and weakened,
Yeah.
I would say, East Africa around, the turn of the century, between going from 1800 to 1900?
I would have to go back to get the exact numbers, but if you think of history in general and the Ottoman Empire,
Right.
and when they were invading North Africa and Northeast Africa, so the Horn of Africa was, not spared of that. So they would say, Salam, Salam, Tishat Biharat, Kab Turki, Kasab Dargi, Magzati Qurnat. And, it's like, Magzati Qurnat means the most brutal of, oppression. But, even in that, the first thing in that song is what? Salam,
yeah.
because, and that really is to demonstrate and emphasize that we're a peaceful people. We want peace. We have always been about peace. We didn't go around and invade, but don't get it wrong. We will defend what's ours.
And Eritrea has a long history of fighting against, I'd say East Africa in general, but Eritrea especially has a long history of fighting against invaders who've tried to come to this region and push their way in. I remember you was telling me about all the graveyards that are there that are specifically for the invaders who have come and did not leave, right? Is it?
Yeah, there's a graveyard for the British soldiers. There's one for the English soldiers.
Wow.
And, that just shows you that we're not just a peaceful people just to say we're peaceful, but we revere life, you know?
Right.
And so, and we also have a culture of revering the process of, you don't just throw a body just because that body fell when it was on the enemy side, So, they fell in our land, they're gonna get a proper burial. And, even the graveyard is kept impeccably,
I saw that. It was
it's
cleaner than the graveyards here.
And, it's
just respect for life, even if it is someone who was, against
and
you. Just
I remember, like, because my parents were prominent in community leadership and not just during life, but also in the transition of death. Like one of my first memories of, being at a funeral and the not just the funeral procession, but how the body is prepared for burial. That is so, like, if you look at, how bodies are mummified, in ancient Kemet, and the wrappings and how that body is prepared for burial.
That tradition is still carried on till today.
It is.
That's
and I
amazing.
didn't get that until I was here and I was, I was doing my own study because I love history. So I started studying just anything that had to do with African civilization. And when I was looking at, ancient Egypt and the process of mummifying and how they wrapped the body, and I was like, whoa, this is how I saw it being done, And children are not supposed to be exposed to that, but I was such a curious child, and I would follow my mom everywhere. She was, an herbalist, a healer, and a midwife, and also, helped with preparing the body for burial. So I would follow her and just watch things discreetly, and I was really blessed with like really vivid memories. So the 12 years that I was in Eritrea, I just feel like I was endowed with so much memory and so much culture.
I'm glad you brought that point up because I wanted to actually, for our listeners, ask. A lot of people, they confuse Ethiopia and Eritrea, and I wanted to ask just like, what would you say are the, a lot of the people are related, a lot of the people's kinfolk, but what would you say are the distinctions that distinguish Eritrea from Ethiopia, number one? And I'm not trying to create a division, but just, to say this is this and this is this to where people aren't mixing the two, number one. Yeah. And number two, at what point would you say Eritrea kind of made the split and claimed its independence, or when did it start? I won't say, when did it?
Well, so, I want to first clarify and declare that I am a Pan-Africanist. So, all African people are my people, my family. So just in that, I see all Ethiopians as my family. And I do have, you know, family members in my immediate, my Hansel family that are in Ethiopia, that are half, you know, Amara or Tigray. So just to get that.
Amhara, Tigray, those are the tribes of
So,
Ethiopia.
and then,
Okay.
you know,
Just
Eritrea
for
has
our
9 ethnic groups, but
Right.
think about this. Ethiopia is at least 14 times as big as Eritrea. There are thousands of different
Oh my God.
tribes and ethnic groups
Wow.
in Ethiopia.
Wow.
Now think about that. Think about the richness, you know, of the languages, the culture, the history.
I can't
You
even
know,
wrap my mind
like,
around that. That's
yeah,
it's too
so
many.
when
It's
I-
like,
I-
how
you
many
know-
languages? It's like, ooh.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm.
You know, and so just think about the vastness. And so when I think of, you know, Ethiopia and Ethiopian history, that is my history, and I want to learn about that. Just like I want to learn about Ghana and Ghanaian history, because I see that as my history. But to go back to Eritrea and its independence, so, you know, if you could think of the Berlin Conference and what had happened then, and how then after that conference, Western nations of Europe, you know, moved forward with invading and colonizing Africa. So in that process, different European nations had, you know, claimed territory of different African parts. So if you think of Eritrea, it was basically the colony of Italy.
Got it. So
at that
some type of deal was made where they could come and.
So I don't know how
Right.
they made their deals, but the thing is, they had basically cut Africa into pieces where different European nations had claimed different parts. So, you know, and it's so messed up because it's, you know, so then.
So let me just go back. So you're saying that they cut out a part of what was then Ethiopia or East Africa, and then called it. Did they call it Eritrea, or what were they calling it in the beginning when they colonized it?
I think they did term Eritrea because if you look back, if I look back at the history, you know, like my grandparents and stuff, you know, the term Bahari Nagasi is very, very prominent, very, you know, and that was kind of like defining or distincting terminology for Eritrea versus Ethiopia. You know, when you say Bahari Nagasi, it's like you're talking about that kingdom that that really was the kings of the sea.
Gotcha.
Now, if you look at Ethiopia, it's more inland.
Yes,
right?
they're not on the border. That's right.
And as far as I know, I don't think that term is used for Ethiopia. That, for me, as far as I know, is a specific
This is Eritrea, right?
name of Eritrea, the Bahari Nagasi,
Gotcha. No, I was just trying to just kind of give our listeners just like a general idea of when this identity emerged. You know, I know it was identity within all of the identities of Ethiopia at a certain point, but it's very clear that, you know, it kind of emerged and kind of created its own identity at a certain point, and it's just interesting to know what was it that caused that identity to come into existence.
I think you know there's national identity, and there's, you know, and then there's political identity, right?
Okay.
So I think the national identity might have been in different names or under different names, but Eritreans have always known they're Eritreans. So now Eritrea is not just a national but a political identity.
Right.
You know what I mean? Because when we were struggling for liberation or reclaiming our independence and sovereign nation, that came actually as a result of, okay, so if you could go back to, you know, the colonization of Africa and the wars that the European nations were having, you know, amongst each other, Italy lost to British.
Okay.
So when Italy came to Eritrea, they came and they settled. They actually used to call Eritrea especially the capital of Eritrea, which is Asmara,
Rome in Africa.
which is now, declared a world treasure by UNICEF, right? They used to call it small Rome or little Rome. So the structures, like they built theaters, they built their homes to stay. We'll talk about that more later about their homes and what.
And these were the Italians, right?
Yeah, these are the Italians. But
and this was
what,
World War I or World War II when they were
World
War II
time.
Wow.
Yeah. So when Mussolini lost to the British, so the Britain were basically, I'll just say supporting Haile Selassie. That's a whole different story for another day. But when the British lost, they put Eritrea under the Federation of Ethiopia, under the Federation of Haile Selassie. Now, according to the UN, this is an actual UN case. When, according to the UN, that federation was supposed to be only for 10 years. And the excuse, because this was not fact, the excuse was that Eritrea was a small nation, a new nation, and it needed the assistance and the support of Ethiopia, a more established nation.
Right.
So for 10 years, that was supposed to be a support. In those 10 years, Eritrean leaders were assassinated. Our scholars were vanished. There is a historical island in the Red Sea, the Dahlak Islands. There's one island specifically called Nahra, and Nahra is known for when our scholars or our leaders went to Nahra, they didn't come back. So
it was like the Guantanamo Bay of Africa.
Yes, it was a systemic way of detaining and vanishing and assassinating our leaders.
And those are called the Dahlak Islands, you say?
The Dahlak Islands
in the Red Sea?
Yes. So in the Red Sea there are hundreds of islands. The Dahlak Islands are they belong to Eritrea. There are other islands that belong to Yemen, that belong to other nations, but the Dahlak Islands are Eritrean, and it's a beautiful, beautiful part of the world, period. The Red Sea has sea life that are not seen anywhere else. It has minerals that are not found anywhere else. So the Dahlak Islands are also strategically, a really, 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 really powerful place to be and to have control over. So that has also made Eritrea a target throughout history.
As I'm listening to this story, Mahedet, what I hear is that I'm hearing like all these European powers, and they're picking different people, and it sounds like they were kind of pitting them against each other so they could come in and kind of seize that very important, crucial waterway, Red Sea.
Right.
And we look at what's going on today. They're the main presence in the Red Sea. When once upon a time, I guess you're talking about between World War I and World War II, it was the kings of the sea who regulated that. But now the kings of the sea,
before that.
and a millennia, right? But now the kings of the sea are the Marines, the British Marines, the American Marines. And how do you think that has affected that region, particularly the fact that someone else controls the waterway? What do you think about that?
Well, I mean, it's now I'm thinking about water in general, and how water has been used to brutalize and traumatize African people, whether it's the slave trade or what has happened with the Red Sea, what's happening right now with a lot of young Africans, including many of them Eritreans perishing in the Mediterranean Sea and the Red Sea, and how the Europeans know the power of water, and how we were the navigators and the masters of navigating the waters of the world, and they have systematically done so many brutalizing activities and events throughout our